The annual business conference was buzzing with energy. Hundreds of people filled the hotel ballroom, everyone dressed in their best professional attire. The sound of conversations, clinking coffee cups, and shuffling papers created that familiar atmosphere of networking events. Everyone was there for the same reason: to make connections, learn something new, and hopefully advance their careers. I was standing near the registration table, checking my phone and trying to build up courage to actually talk to someone. These events always made me a bit nervous. Sure, I could handle my job just fine, but walking up to strangers and making small talk, that was a different story. I was scrolling through my notes when something made me look up. That's when I saw her. She had just walked through the main entrance, and honestly, it was like watching a movie scene unfold in real life. The woman moved through the crowd with a kind of confidence I had only read about in self-help books. Her posture was perfect, shoulders back, head held high, but not in an arrogant way. It was more like she genuinely belonged wherever she went. What struck me first was her smile. Not the fake, practiced smile most people wear at these events, but something that seemed to light up her entire face. She wasn't tall, maybe average height, but something about the way she carried herself made her seem larger than life. Her hair was pulled back in a neat style, and she wore a simple but elegant navy blue suit that looked like it was made just for her. But here's what really caught my attention. She didn't hesitate. Not even for a second. Most people at these events, myself included, tend to hover around the edges for a while. We grab our coffee, check our phones, maybe scan the room looking for someone we know or at least someone who looks approachable. Not her. She walked straight into the crowd like she owned the place. I watched as she approached a group of executives near the main stage. These were the kind of people who usually intimidated everyone else. Senior managers, company owners, the type who made decisions that affected hundreds of employees. She walked right up to them, extended her hand, and introduced herself. Within minutes, they were all laughing at something she had said. From where I stood, I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see their body language change. These serious, sometimes stern-looking business leaders were leaning in, genuinely engaged in whatever she was telling them. One of them, a man I recognized as the CEO of a major local company, was nodding enthusiastically and writing something down on his business card before handing it to her. After about 10 minutes, she gracefully excused herself from that group and moved on to the next. Same pattern: confident approach, warm introduction, engaging conversation, and genuine connections made. It was like watching a masterclass in networking. What impressed me most wasn't just her confidence, though. It was how authentic it seemed. I had seen plenty of people who could work a room, but they often came across as pushy or fake. She was different. People seemed genuinely happy to meet her, not just polite because they had to be. She made her way around the room systematically but naturally. She talked to the keynote speaker for several minutes, had an animated discussion with a group of young entrepreneurs, and even spent time chatting with the hotel staff who were serving refreshments. She treated everyone with the same level of respect and genuine interest. About an hour into the event, I was still observing from my safe spot near the wall when something unexpected happened. She looked directly at me. For a moment, I thought she was looking at someone behind me. I actually turned around to check. But no, her eyes were focused on me, and that brilliant smile was directed my way. Before I could figure out what to do with my hands or remember how to act like a normal human being, she was walking toward me. My heart started beating faster. This confident, successful woman who had been effortlessly commanding respect from everyone in the room was coming to talk to me. I tried to quickly think of something intelligent to say, but my mind went completely blank. "Hi there," she said as she approached, extending her hand. "I don't think we've met. I'm Alex." Her handshake was firm but not crushing, and she maintained eye contact in a way that made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the room at that moment. Up close, I could see that her confidence wasn't just an act. There was something genuine about it, something that came from deep inside. I'm Jake," I managed to stammer out, immediately regretting how nervous I sounded. "Nice to meet you, Jake," she said, and somehow she made my ordinary name sound important. "Is this your first time at one of these conferences?" We started talking, and I was amazed at how easy she made it. She asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. She didn't interrupt or look over my shoulder for someone more important to talk to, which unfortunately happened a lot at these events. She told me she worked in marketing for a consulting firm, but the way she talked about her job made it sound like the most exciting career in the world. She had stories about campaigns she had worked on, clients she had helped turn their businesses around, and creative solutions she had developed for challenging problems. But what really impressed me was how she made me feel comfortable talking about my own work. I had always thought my job in data analysis was pretty boring, but somehow she made me feel like what I did was valuable and interesting. She asked specific questions about my projects and seemed genuinely fascinated by the technical aspects of what I explained. As we talked, I started to relax. Her energy was contagious, and I found myself speaking more confidently than I usually did at these events. She had this way of making you feel like you were having a private conversation, even in a room full of hundreds of people. "You know what I love about conferences like this?" she said at one point, gesturing toward the crowd around us. "Everyone here has a story. Everyone has something they're passionate about, some problem they're trying to solve, some goal they're working toward. But most people are too nervous or too busy trying to impress others to share their real stories." I nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. I had been one of those nervous people just an hour earlier. "The best connections happen when people stop trying so hard and just be themselves," she continued. "That's when you find out who you really want to work with." We talked for almost 30 minutes before she was approached by someone who needed to discuss a potential business partnership. She handled the interruption gracefully, introducing me to the newcomer and making sure I felt included in the initial part of their conversation, before I naturally stepped away to give them privacy. As I walked away, I couldn't stop thinking about how different she was from anyone I had ever met at a professional event. She wasn't just confident, she was authentically confident. There's a difference, and after meeting her, I finally understood what that difference was. The rest of the conference felt different after our conversation. I found myself approaching other people with a little more confidence, asking better questions, and actually enjoying the networking aspect for the first time ever. But I kept thinking about Alex and wondering what it would be like to move through the world with that kind of natural assurance. She made it look so effortless, like she had never doubted herself or worried about what others might think. Little did I know that first impression, as powerful as it was only showing me one side of a much more complex story. 3 weeks after the conference, I got an unexpected text message. It was from Alex. She had gotten my number from the conference contact list and wanted to know if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. She said she had enjoyed our conversation and thought we might be able to help each other with some work projects. I was surprised but excited. Meeting someone like Alex again seemed almost too good to be true. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop downtown the following Tuesday. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with her laptop open and papers spread around her. She looked just as polished as she had at the conference, but something seemed different. Maybe it was the casual setting, or maybe I was just paying more attention this time. "Jake, thanks for coming," she said, standing up to shake my hand. That same confident smile was there, but I noticed she held onto her coffee cup with both hands when she sat back down, like she needed something to hold on to. We started talking about work, and she told me about a new campaign her company was developing. As she explained the project, her eyes lit up with genuine excitement. She really did love what she did, that much was clear. But then something interesting happened. When I asked her how she had gotten into marketing, her answer seemed rehearsed. She gave me what sounded like her standard response about always being interested in creative problem solving and helping businesses grow. It wasn't that she was lying, but it felt like she was giving me the official version of her story. I tried a different approach. "What made you choose your current company specifically?" I asked. For just a moment, her smile flickered. It was so brief I almost missed it. "Oh, great team. Exciting projects, good opportunities for growth," she said, but her voice sounded a little less steady than usual. As we continued talking, I started noticing other small things. When I mentioned that I had moved to the city from a small town, she quickly changed the subject to ask about my current neighborhood. When someone at the next table started talking loudly on their phone about family problems, she seemed to get uncomfortable and suggested we move to a quieter spot. During our second meeting a few weeks later, I learned more about her professional life. She had been with her company for 3 years and was one of their top performers. She had won several awards and had been featured in industry magazines. Everything about her career seemed perfect. But I noticed she never mentioned her personal life. No stories about weekends, no mention of friends or family, no hobbies outside of work. When I talked about visiting my parents or hanging out with my college roommates, she would listen politely but never share similar stories of her own. One day we were working together on a small project that connected both our companies. I had to call her during the evening to discuss some urgent changes to our presentation. When she answered the phone, I could hear that she had been crying. "Hey Jake, what's up?" she said, trying to sound normal, but her voice was slightly hoarse. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. "Oh yeah, I'm fine. Just tired from a long day. What did you need to talk about?" She insisted we discuss the work issue, and she handled it with her usual professionalism. But something about that phone call stuck with me. The confident, put-together Alex I knew didn't match the voice I had heard that evening. Our coffee meetings became regular, usually every 2 weeks. I started looking forward to them more than I probably should have. She was intelligent, funny, and had incredible insights about business and life. But I also started noticing a pattern in our conversations. Whenever we talked about challenges or difficulties, her responses were always about overcoming obstacles and staying positive. It wasn't that these were bad things to say, but they sounded like motivational quotes rather than real, personal experiences. She never seemed to struggle with anything or have bad days or make mistakes. One afternoon, we were discussing a particularly difficult client I was dealing with. I was telling her how frustrated I was and how I had handled the situation poorly during a meeting earlier that week. "Everyone makes mistakes," she said with that perfect smile. "The important thing is learning from them and moving forward." "Have you ever had a really bad meeting like that?" I asked. She paused for a moment longer than usual. "Well, there are always challenging situations in any job, but I try to focus on the positive outcomes and what can be learned from every experience." It was another one of those answers that sounded right but didn't really tell me anything about her actual experiences. Around our 5th or 6th meeting, something different happened. We were talking about career goals, and I mentioned that I sometimes felt like I was falling behind compared to other people my age. I worried that I wasn't advancing fast enough or making the right choices. For the first time, Alex didn't immediately respond with an encouraging platitude. Instead, she stared into her coffee cup for several seconds. When she looked up, there was something different in her eyes. "Do you ever feel like you're performing a role rather than living your life?" she asked quietly. The question caught me completely off guard. It was so different from her usual confident observations. "What do you mean?" I asked. She seemed to realize what she had said and quickly backtracked. "Oh, I just mean sometimes work can feel like we're playing a part, Professional expectations and all that." But the moment had revealed something important. For just a few seconds, I had seen past the confident exterior to something more vulnerable underneath. After that meeting, I started paying even closer attention. I noticed that she never seemed to relax completely, even during casual conversations. Her posture was always perfect, her responses always thoughtful, her smile always ready. It was like she was constantly on stage, performing the role of someone who had everything figured out. I began to wonder what it cost her to maintain that image all the time. Nobody could be that put together constantly without it being exhausting. During one of our last meetings of that period, something happened that confirmed my suspicions. We were walking out of the coffee shop together when she fumbled with her keys and dropped them. As she bent down to pick them up, I heard her mutter under her breath, "Why can't I do anything right?" It was said so quietly I wasn't sure she knew she had spoken out loud. But those 7 words revealed more about the real Alex than months of our conversations had. When she stood back up, the confident smile was immediately back in place. "Sorry about that, these keys have a mind of their own," she said with a laugh. But I had heard what she really thought about herself in that unguarded moment, and it was completely different from the image she presented to the world. I realized that Alex wasn't just confident and successful. She was working incredibly hard to appear that way, and the effort was taking a toll on her that she would never admit to anyone, maybe not even to herself. The woman who had walked up to me so fearlessly at that conference was carrying burdens I was only beginning to understand. 2 months into our friendship, everything changed on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Alex had texted me earlier that morning asking if we could meet for coffee. Nothing unusual about that, except the message came at 6 in the morning and it was much shorter than her usual detailed texts. Just, "Can we meet today? Need to talk." Something about those 4 words worried me. In all our previous meetings, Alex had always been the one setting the agenda, suggesting specific topics to discuss or sharing exciting updates about her work. This felt different. I found her sitting in the back corner of our usual coffee shop, But she wasn't her typical self. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore a simple sweater instead of her usual professional attire, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked tired, really tired. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. Her voice was quieter than normal, and she wasn't making her usual direct eye contact. "Of course. Is everything okay?" I asked, genuinely concerned. She let out a long breath and stared at her untouched coffee. "I got fired yesterday." The words hung in the air between us. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Alex, who seemed to excel at everything she touched, who had won awards and been featured in magazines, had lost her job. "What happened?" I asked gently. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with how much to tell me. Finally, she started talking, but her voice was different. Gone was the confident tone I had grown used to. Instead, she sounded defeated. "There was a big client presentation last week, the biggest account our company had ever pitched for. I had been working on it for months, putting in 16-hour days, perfecting every detail." She paused and rubbed her temples. "The morning of the presentation, I completely fell apart." She told me how she had been standing in the conference room, surrounded by executives from both companies, with her perfectly prepared slides ready to go. But when she opened her mouth to begin, nothing came out. Not because she didn't know the material, but because suddenly, overwhelmingly, she couldn't pretend anymore. "I just stood there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. 20 people staring at me, waiting for me to start, and I couldn't say a single word. My hands started shaking, my heart was racing, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The presentation had been a disaster. Alex had eventually managed to stumble through some of the material, but it was clear to everyone that something was seriously wrong. The client chose a different company, and Alex's boss called her into his office the next day. He said I wasn't meeting expectations anymore, that my performance had been declining for weeks, and the presentation was the final straw. She finally looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I had never seen before. Fear. "The truth is, Jake, I haven't been meeting expectations for months. I've just been really good at hiding it." Over the next hour, Alex told me the real story of her life. The confident, successful woman I thought I knew was actually someone who had been struggling for years to keep up an image that was slowly destroying her. She had grown up in a family where anything less than perfection was considered failure. Her parents, both successful professionals, had expected her to excel at everything from school to sports to social situations. She learned early that love and approval came with conditions, and those conditions were always about being the best. "I became really good at being what people expected me to be," she explained. "The perfect student, the perfect employee, the perfect friend. But I never learned how to just be myself because I was never sure who that actually was." Her job, which looked so glamorous from the outside, had become a source of constant stress. She worked excessive hours not because she loved the work, but because she was terrified of anyone discovering that she wasn't as capable as she appeared to be. Every success felt temporary, and every small mistake felt like evidence that she was a fraud. "I haven't had a real vacation in 3 years," she said. "I work weekends, I answer emails at midnight. I say yes to every project even when I'm already overwhelmed. Because I thought if I just worked hard enough, eventually I would actually become the person everyone thought I was." The pressure had been building for months. She had stopped sleeping well, stopped eating regular meals, stopped doing anything that wasn't related to maintaining her professional image. She had no close friends because she was too afraid to let anyone see her struggles. She hadn't dated anyone in over a year because relationships required a level of honesty she couldn't handle. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm actually good at my job. I have creative ideas. I work well with clients. I understand marketing strategy. But I've been so focused on appearing perfect that I stopped trusting my own abilities." She told me about the weeks leading up to the failed presentation. She had second-guessed every decision, rewritten her slides dozens of times, and practiced her speech until she had memorized every word. But instead of making her more confident, all that preparation had made her more anxious. The night before the presentation, I didn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about all the ways it could go wrong, all the things people might criticize, all the reasons why I wasn't qualified to be in that room. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. By the time I got to the office that morning, I was already defeated. As she talked, I started to understand why she had always seemed so controlled in our conversations. Every response had been carefully calculated. Every story had been edited to show her in the best light. Every emotion had been managed to maintain her image. I've been performing a version of myself for so long that I forgot who I actually am underneath all of it, she said. And yesterday in that conference room, I finally ran out of energy to keep up the act. For the first time since I had known her, Alex wasn't trying to inspire me or teach me something or present herself as someone who had all the answers. She was just being honest about her struggles, her fears, and her failures. I don't know what to do now, Jake, she admitted. I've built my entire identity around being successful and confident and having everything together. Without that, I don't know who I am. Sitting across from her in that coffee shop, I realized I was seeing the real Alex for the first time. Not the polished professional who had approached me at the conference, but the vulnerable, scared, exhausted person who had been hiding behind that image all along. She had walked up to me fearlessly that first day, but now she sat before me with nothing left to hide behind. No confident smile, no perfect posture, no inspiring words. Just a human being who had finally reached the point where pretending was no longer possible. And somehow in her vulnerability, she was more real and more courageous than she had ever been while wearing her armor of perfection. The day after Alex shared her story with me, she disappeared. Not literally, but she stopped responding to my texts. She didn't answer my calls. For someone who had always been quick to reply to messages, the silence was concerning. I gave her space for a few days, thinking she might need time to process everything that had happened. But when a week passed without any word from her, I started to worry. I knew she was probably regretting how much she had told me. Opening up like that must have felt terrifying for someone who had spent years keeping everything locked inside. Finally, I decided to check on her. I stopped by the coffee shop where we always met, hoping I might find her there. She wasn't there, but the barista mentioned that she had come in a few days earlier looking upset and had left without ordering anything. I sent her one more text.
Hey, just want you to know I'm here if you need to talk.
No pressure, but I'm thinking about you. 3 days later, she finally replied, Can we meet? I need to explain some things. When I saw her at the coffee shop, she looked different again. Not the polished professional from our first meeting, and not the broken person from our last conversation. She seemed somewhere in between, like she was trying to figure out which version of herself to be. I'm sorry I disappeared on you, she said as soon as I sat down. I was embarrassed about everything I told you. You don't need to apologize for being honest, I said. She looked surprised by my response. You're not thinking differently about me? After knowing that I'm basically a fraud who just got fired for having a panic attack? Alex, you're not a fraud. You're someone who has been under an incredible amount of pressure for years. What happened to you could happen to anyone. She stared at me for a moment, and I could see her processing my words. I don't think anyone had ever responded to her struggles with understanding instead of judgment. I keep waiting for you to tell me how to fix this, she said. Give me advice about getting back on track or finding a new job or getting my life together. That's what everyone else does. Do you want advice or do you just want someone to listen? I honestly don't know, she admitted. I'm so used to people expecting me to have answers that I forgot it's okay to not know what to do next. Over the following weeks, we met regularly, but our conversations were completely different from before. Instead of talking about work projects or career goals, we talked about real things. Alex started sharing stories about her childhood, her fears and her dreams that had nothing to do with professional success. I learned that she had wanted to be an art teacher when she was younger, but her parents had convinced her it wasn't practical. She loved painting but hadn't touched a brush in years because she considered it a waste of time that could be spent working. She had always wanted to travel, not for business conferences, but just to explore new places and meet new people. I've been living someone else's idea of a successful life, she told me one afternoon. I achieved everything I was supposed to want, but none of it actually made me happy. The process wasn't easy for her. Some days she would show up to our meetings feeling motivated and optimistic about starting over. Other days she would arrive feeling lost and scared about the future. The hardest part seemed to be learning to accept that having bad days was normal. I keep thinking I should be over this by now, she said during one of our more difficult conversations. I should have figured out my next steps and gotten back to being productive. Says who? I asked. I don't know. Everyone? Society? My own brain that's been programmed to think that struggling means failing. One of the biggest challenges was dealing with other people's reactions to her situation. Some of her former colleagues had heard about what happened and reached out with job opportunities. But their messages made it clear they expected her to bounce back quickly and return to her previous level of performance. "They keep telling me that this is just a temporary setback," she said. "That I'll be stronger than ever once I get through it. But what if I don't want to go back to being that person? What if being stronger means accepting that I'm human instead of trying to be superhuman?" She started seeing a counselor, which was a huge step for someone who had always believed that asking for help was a sign of weakness. The counselor helped her understand that perfectionism wasn't actually about being perfect. It was about fear of rejection and criticism. "I've been so afraid of people seeing my flaws that I never gave them a chance to accept me as I am," she realized. "I was rejecting myself before anyone else could." Slowly, Alex began experimenting with being more authentic in her daily life. Instead of always saying she was great when people asked how she was doing, she started giving honest answers. Instead of agreeing to every request or invitation, she started saying no when she needed time for herself. The changes were small, but they made a big difference in how she felt. She told me about going to a networking event and admitting to someone that she was between jobs and figuring out her next steps. Instead of judging her, the person shared their own story about a career transition they had gone through. "It turns out people relate to struggle more than they relate to perfection," she said with genuine surprise. She also started painting again. At first, she felt guilty about spending time on something that wasn't advancing her career, but gradually she began to see it as an important part of taking care of herself. She brought me a small painting she had done of the coffee shop where we always met. "It's not very good," she said as she handed it to me. "It's beautiful," I replied, and I meant it. Not because it was technically perfect, but because it represented something real and personal that she had created. "I'm learning to be okay with not very good," she said. "My whole life I only did things I knew I could excel at. But that meant I missed out on a lot of experiences and never gave myself a chance to grow." As the months passed, I watched Alex slowly become more comfortable with uncertainty. She stopped trying to have a 5-year plan and started focusing on what felt right in the moment. She took a part-time consulting job that gave her flexibility to explore other interests. She started volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic computer skills to seniors. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm not performing for anyone," she told me. "I'm just living." The woman who had once needed to control every aspect of how she appeared to the world was learning to be okay with being seen exactly as she was, flaws and all. 6 months after that life-changing conversation in the coffee shop, I got an invitation that surprised me. Alex was hosting a small art show at a local gallery, featuring paintings she had created during her journey of self-discovery. The invitation was handwritten, not printed, and included a personal note that said, "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." I arrived at the gallery on a Friday evening to find about 30 people admiring Alex's artwork. The paintings were beautiful, but what struck me most was how different they were from what I might have expected. Instead of perfect polished pieces, they were full of emotion and raw honesty. Some were bright and hopeful, others were darker and showed struggle, but all of them felt real. Alex spotted me from across the room and walked over with that familiar smile. But it was different now. It was softer, more genuine, and somehow more confident than the practiced smile I had first encountered at the conference. "I can't believe you actually did this," I said, gesturing around the gallery. "Neither can I," she laughed. 6 months ago, I would never have shown these to anyone. They're not perfect. Some of them are pretty rough around the edges, but they're mine." As we walked around the gallery together, she told me about each piece. One painting showed a figure walking away from a tall building, representing her leaving her corporate job. Another showed hands reaching up through dark water toward light, which she had painted during one of her most difficult weeks. My favorite was a painting of 2 people sitting at a small table with coffee cups, and I realized it was inspired by our conversations. "This whole experience has taught me something important," she said as we stood in front of that painting. "I spent so many years trying to be someone worth knowing that I never gave people a chance to know the real me. Turns out the real me is actually worth knowing too." An older woman approached us, someone I didn't recognize. She had been studying one of Alex's paintings for several minutes. "Excuse me," the woman said to Alex, "are you the artist?" "Yes, I am," Alex replied, and I could hear just a tiny bit of nervousness in her voice. "I just wanted to tell you that this painting really spoke to me," the woman continued. pointing to a piece that showed a person standing in front of a mirror, but the reflection showed a different person entirely. I went through something similar a few years ago, and seeing this reminds me that I'm not alone in that experience. Alex's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Thank you so much for telling me that. That's exactly what I was hoping to express. After the woman walked away, Alex turned to me with tears in her eyes. Did you hear that? My painting made someone feel less alone. I never would have experienced that if I had kept pretending everything was perfect. The art show was a success, but more importantly, it represented something bigger for Alex. She had found a way to turn her struggles into something meaningful that could help other people. Several people that night shared their own stories with her, drawn in by the honesty in her work. A few weeks later, Alex told me about a new opportunity that had come up. A local nonprofit organization had seen her art show and asked if she would be interested in teaching art therapy workshops for people dealing with workplace stress and burnout. It's not a traditional career path, she said. It doesn't pay as much as my old job, and it definitely doesn't look impressive on paper. But when they described the program, I felt excited about work for the first time in years. She took the position and threw herself into it with the same energy she had once put into corporate presentations, but with a completely different motivation. Instead of trying to prove herself or impress anyone, she was genuinely passionate about helping people who were struggling with similar challenges to what she had faced. The funny thing is, she told me one day, I'm actually better at this job than I ever was at my old one. When you're not constantly worried about appearing perfect, you can focus on actually doing good work. Her workshops became popular, and soon she was invited to speak at conferences about workplace mental health and the dangers of perfectionism. The first time she was asked to give a presentation, she called me in a panic. What if I have another breakdown? She asked. What if I freeze up again? What would you tell someone in your workshop who was worried about the same thing? I asked her. She was quiet for a moment. I would tell them that it's okay to be nervous, and that being human isn't something to be ashamed of. Exactly. Her first speaking engagement went well, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. She shared her own story, including the failed presentation that had led to losing her job. The audience was captivated, and afterward several people approached her to share their own experiences with perfectionism and workplace pressure. I used to think vulnerability was weakness, she told me after that event. Now I understand that it takes courage to be vulnerable, and that courage creates connections with other people. About a year after her transformation began, I found myself at another networking event. It was similar to the conference where I had first met Alex, but this time I felt more confident navigating the room. Alex had taught me that authenticity was more valuable than trying to impress people. I was standing near the registration table when I noticed a young woman who looked nervous and overwhelmed. She was checking her phone repeatedly and seemed unsure about approaching anyone. She reminded me of myself at that first conference, and I was about to go talk to her when I saw someone else walking in her direction. It was Alex. I watched as she approached the nervous woman with that same fearless stride I remembered from our first meeting, but everything else was different. Her smile was warm and genuine, not performed. Her confidence came from self-acceptance rather than self-protection. When she introduced herself, she seemed genuinely interested in the other person, rather than focused on making an impression. Within minutes, the young woman was laughing and seemed much more relaxed. Alex had a gift for making people feel comfortable, but now it came from a place of real empathy rather than practiced charm. Later that evening, Alex found me in the crowd. Did you see me talking to Lisa earlier? She asked. She just graduated college and is terrified about starting her career. She thinks she has to have everything figured out immediately. What did you tell her? I told her the truth, that nobody has everything figured out, that making mistakes is how we learn, and that the pressure to be perfect will make her miserable if she lets it. Alex smiled. I also told her that there's nothing wrong with being nervous or uncertain, and that asking for help is actually a sign of strength. As I listened to Alex talk about her conversation with the young woman, I realized something important. The person who had walked up to me fearlessly at that first conference had been performing confidence to hide her insecurities. But the person standing in front of me now had real confidence that came from accepting herself completely, flaws and all. She had learned to stand with nothing on, metaphorically speaking, and discovered that her authentic self was actually stronger and more valuable than any perfect image she could have created.